Welcome back to another amazing episode of Market Impact Insights. It's 2026, and what an opportunity for growth through digital marketing and advertising. So there's all that upside, but there's also a challenge, and call it the elephant in the room, but we really need to have a conversation around fraud. This is a big issue. It's $100 billion plus kind of impact. We're going to get into that with Rich Kahn because he's passionate about helping businesses address and navigate through that risk and achieve all of that upside that they can get through their digital marketing and advertising strategies. He has been described as a true force to be reckoned with in the world of digital marketing and entrepreneurship. He is the co-founder and CEO of Anura.io, and he's led the development of a cutting-edge ad fraud solution that is literally changing the game for businesses worldwide. It's bringing advanced technology designed to identify and eliminate that fraudulent activity, including bots, malware, and human fraud. And this is going to help companies improve their campaign performance and increase ROI, powerful financial impact. Rich has an impressive track record of success. He's operated a business that made the Inc. 5000 list for 5 years in a row. He also achieved an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award for technology. He's been in and around and leading one of the fastest growing advertising and marketing companies in the U.S. So he's bringing all of that experience into this important conversation. Rich, welcome to Market Impact Insights.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, Rich, so let's kind of go back. You've had this really interesting journey. What originally sparked your passion to focus your career in and around digital marketing and advertising?
Well, I kind of fell into it, I guess is the best way to say it. Um, my journey started like in 1993, and I was doing a lot of research on the internet because once the internet was, from what I understand, I did some research. September 1st, 1991, the internet was made public, so people had access to it. But it was a very command line driven interface. It was no point and click. It was, just kind of like a techie's world where computers from around the globe are be able to be connected with each other. And I was enthralled. I'm like, this is awesome. This is great. I can see lots of things. I can see what's going to happen. So I started doing a lot of research on, old school magazines and anything I could get my hands on just to learn what was going on. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to write an email magazine on it. So I started writing this magazine, and it was a weekly publication that I would write just to, what's changing, what's going on, what's the new things, what are, how do you get to certain resources on this internet and take advantage of what it has to offer and like the kind of cool stuff that you can do. And I basically back in the day trolled AOL news groups and said, hey, I'm writing this magazine. If you're interested, send me your email address to this location. I'll include you in the magazine. And in a short period of time, we had over 20,000 subscribers to the magazine. Back then, that was a lot. And it was growing very quickly. And then somebody turned around to me one day and said, hey, can I advertise in your magazine? I never thought to make money with it. And that got me my first step into a digital marketing environment. So I kind of fell into it.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're kind of bringing that at the inception of the internet because we take it so much for granted today. It's so intrinsic in our lives. But I even think back, I remember a friend of mine back in 1994, I think it was, I said, hey, come on over. I want to show you something, in terms of what's going on with this thing called the internet. And it was literally the whole array of future possibilities was in front of us. And I don't think it took us a while to get our arms around what is this really going to mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just something different, something cool, something, that just, you knew this was a life-changing, application that was going to be put out. And like the possibilities were endless. Like you knew that it was only going to get better. Like wherever wherever we are today, 10 years from now, it's only going to get better. Like there's just going to be more applications, more connectivity, more stuff going on. So like, again, back then it was the next major leap in how technology was going to connect everybody. And it was cool. Like from a geek, it was something cool.
So, Rich, when you look back on your journey, what's been some of the biggest personal learning that you've taken from that? And Have there been surprises for you along the way?
Oh yeah. Um, things like I'm trying to think. Like there was just so many like interesting things that happened along the way. I'll give you an example. I had a company. Um, this is going back. We launched it. I want to say late 1999, and it was just something different. Like we were paying people to surf the internet. Like we gave them an application, we displayed ads on it, and we gave them a percentage of the revenue. And then we had it basically a multi-level tier in it where if they referred friends and their friends referred friends, they would make a little bit of money for all the time that they spent online. We had people making a couple $1,000 a month doing this, and it took off. Um, and it was funny because like my first shock at like how massive the internet could be was we launched that application. I want to say like at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we watched it. Like, oh my god, we got a couple people subscribed. Like we just did a small email because again I was into email marketing, and I had an email list, and I did a quick email say, hey, by the way, we just launched this new product. We're going to pay people to surf the web. So now you get paid money while you're surfing the web. And it started off with 3 or 4 signups, 10 signups, and we just started watching the counter, the database counter climb.
Mhm.
By the end of the day, we had over 500 subscribers, and we were just like, we had no idea this was going to take off. By the end of the first month, we'd have 30,000 subscribers. It was just taking off like a bat out of hell, and it was like shocking to see something grow so quick. In fact, that business did its first million in business in the first 5 months, and it was just couldn't believe how fast things could grow on the internet. And again, this is still early stages of the internet. It's still the 90s. So, I mean, we just understanding the power of it, and as more and more, and then of course from that point you can just see forward, like as more and more people start using it, as it gets easier to use. I mean, today it's to the point everybody, and when it first got started, it was really for developers because you had to be kind of a techie or a geek to be able to really navigate the web.
Yeah.
And then it got point and click, and now it's on. Everybody carries a device with them where you're connected to the internet 24/7. It's just amazing the growth that it had.
Yeah. How about for you, just in terms of the business side of things? Just as you look back on that, how maybe you applied learning to kind of evolve, or your perspective actually matured and changed over time.
Well, it's like anything else. We were doing stuff in the beginning just for fun, right? Could we do this? How would it work? Like we never really looked at it like as a business making money. It was always just could we build something that would be fun? And then later on, it became all of a sudden we started making more money doing that than our day jobs. So we got to the point where we quit our day jobs and started doing this full time. And then it kind of changed our perspective. Like, okay, we need to do this as a business. Like, it can't just be for fun now because now we're relying paying our bills based on what we're doing. So the perspective changed as time grew, and then you get connected with that. I love running my own business. I enjoy, the customers or the subscribers that we're growing or the base that we have. And like, it just, perspective grows over time where it's now I'm responsible for a bunch of people's employment, and I've got, more responsibility, and it's still fun, but it's fun in a different way.
Yeah. And of course, something that you've spoken a lot about, you're very aware and focused on is this big, I mentioned, $100 billion problem that is fraud. There's some really bad actors out there, continue to be out there. Could you go into a little more detail on what is really behind all of this fraudulent activity? And are there also maybe some hidden costs we might not even be thinking about?
Sure. So fraud in the digital marketing space, I think everybody understands that it exists. Some people like to pretend it doesn't. Others like to pretend it's the cost of doing business. But the numbers that I quote all the time right now is 2024 numbers, because we haven't gotten all the numbers in yet from 2025. Usually we'll get them sometime this quarter. But in 2024, as a global society, we tipped over $700 billion in digital marketing spend. And of that, we estimated a very conservative estimate of $140 billion being lost to fraud.
Wow.
And people don't understand that size of the business, but like I kind of alluded to Shark Tank, right? You watch these new businesses come up and they
Yeah.
have this new idea for a pet product or for a baby product, And one of the things that they like to quote is, "Oh my God, this is a $3 billion industry. This is a $10 billion industry. Like, there's a lot of growth potential here." But then we talk about it's a $140 billion problem. So this is what fraudsters are looking at, right? There's 140 billion being stolen for, if you know what if you're able to figure out how to do this. And I did read an article, and I can't remember where, but it quoted saying that the average fraudster that steals from online advertisers is making over 5 million a year. So if you have some technical skill, right now there are no direct laws that say you can't do this, so it's kind of a lawless crime. Now we all know that at the end of the day you're stealing money. It's logic, but the laws aren't written to protect that. And that the average person is making 5 million a year. If your moral compass doesn't point north, it's a pretty interesting industry to get into. So you find, and it's growing fast. Like, I remember tracking. I had a report that I did. I did a talk on this a couple years ago, and I actually tracked fraud based on all the reports I can find on the internet that alluded to it. And like in the 2000 teens, let's call it, right, it was humming along around $6 or $7 billion a year. It wasn't out of control, but it was still $6 or $7 billion. Still a big industry. And then around, I want to say around 2019, off the top of my head, all of a sudden it spiked. It went to like 19 billion. Then it went to 40 billion, and then to 100 billion. Like, it just kept exponentially growing to where 2024 was over 140 billion. And it's because with the introduction of AI, it's making it easier for even the non-techs to do it. I mean, right now we all, everybody knows ChatGPT, but there's a product out there called FraudGPT, and it actually will write bots to commit fraud. And then you don't have to be technical. You could just, I mean, let's face it, these things will write the code for you. So you don't have to write a stitch of code. And then, of course, it tells you, okay, now you got to implement it. And you're like, I don't know how to do that. And they'll give you a step by step guide of how to implement and run these things. So if you have a little bit of experience, you don't have to be technical. You don't have to be a coder. You don't have to you can actually get involved in this stuff and take advantage of this market using AI.
Yeah, so significantly, what might have been a barrier to entry before in bad behavior seems like that barrier is just totally gone down, right? Because you don't have to even have the deep technical skill set as much because you're using AI. So, but not for good, but for use of bad behavior.
Yeah. And basically what's happening now is more people are getting involved in it, so it's growing even faster. So it's becoming a problem, and I talk about this all the time. Let's not talk about the internet for a second. Let's talk about a business, right? The average business that jumps online, that we scan their traffic, we're finding 25% of their traffic is fraud. That's the average business. So my question I always ask the business is, okay, well, what percentage do you stop advertising, or does it shut your company down? Like, we know that if it was 100% of the traffic you were buying was fraud, it would just, it would kill your company, it would shut down. But you're at 25% or 10% or 30%, wherever number you're at. As that grows, what percentage of fraud does it take to shut down that business? So I asked the same question for the industry. Right now, about I think my numbers come out to about 22% of the internet is fraudulent, is ad fraud, right? So, and it's still running, right? Still, like I said, it's growing. It's just over 700 billion. But what if that number just creeped up to 50% or 60%? So what number would it take for people to stop advertising on the internet? And this happened with the dot-com bubble back in 2000. People would, the internet was exploding, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, I got to put everything digital," and they put a ton of digital stuff, and fraud ate those budgets, and basically people were realizing they're spending millions of dollars and not getting any kind of return for it. And then it all kind of hit the head in Q2 of 2000 that we're not making any money. Stop spending money on digital. Let's reassess. And that was kind of the dot-com bubble bursting back in 2000. So what happens if this advanced fraud that we have today gets to a point where it's 60, 70%, 80%? It gets to a point where people should just stop advertising, and it'll kill the market.
Yeah, that seems like a scary scenario for sure. And of course, marketers are increasingly relying on data analytics to help make better decisions. in their businesses. How should we be thinking differently about data driven marketing in this age of increased fraud?
Well, that's the problem is this fraud is so carefully crafted, it's skewing your data and people don't even know it. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, a lot of companies do lead generation of some sort, right? Whether it's insurance companies, colleges, they drive traffic to their site to try to get somebody to fill out a form so that they have some interest and then they can start the sale process, right? Call them up, get them on the phone, whatever. And they're basing all their marketing decisions based on who fills out a form. But what's happening is it's getting down to the call center that's picking up and making that phone call, and they're finding out that people didn't fill out that form. That's a sign of fraud, right? Somebody else came along, might have taken, Rich Kahn's information, which is probably very accessible on the internet. They get my name, phone number, email addresses. In fact, there's companies out there that sell this information. They filled out the form with my information, and then all of a sudden somebody's calling me up trying to save money on my car insurance, and yet I didn't fill out that form. And that data to find out that that form was fraudulent is not making it back to the marketing department, which is doing the marketing. All they're seeing is, hey, we spent a bunch of money, we generated a bunch of leads, let's keep doing more of that. So it's skewing their data, making good decisions based on bad data, and it's causing a bad outcome without them even knowing it. So the data analytics, while there's so much out there, not enough of it from what I see when we talk to clients is connected enough to be able to bring that endpoint data back to the marketing department so the marketing can focus on their data driven results. So we tell people all the time, you need a solution, you need a fraud solution to be able to identify and connect that information for the marketing department so the marketing department knows what's real information, what's real visitors that they're paying for versus fake visitors, so they can focus on basically making those data decisions up front.
So is the assumption that it really is valuable to try to get a very experienced and focused outside perspective to help, bring this risk level down versus trying to cobble together some sort of internal solution?
We tell it all the time. So like when we have conversations with people that, oh, my CTO can put something together. Well, your CTO or your development department doesn't have the time to stay on top of what's going on. They're because they got 10,000 other things going on. This is just another problem put on their desk. Um, I mean, we've been doing this for the last 20 plus years, and we have a dedicated team. We have access to not just one client's data, we have access to hundreds of clients' data. So we're able to see fraud across accounts all over the world and bring it all into one place. And literally, we charge clients less than what it would cost to have one person dedicated on their team. So it becomes very cost effective to have an outside opinion, look at the data, and give them feedback rather than trying to put something together yourself. It just before AI was involved, people were doing it all the time and doing it successfully. They were able to mitigate, percentage of their fraud. But with AI, I don't see how they're able to do it on their own. It's just growing too fast, and you need dedicated resources to do it, and it gets expensive.
Now, you mentioned that AI has helped bring that barrier to entry of the bad actors, so making it easier for them to come in and do the fraud. Where else do you see AI impacting how we can actually assess and try to manage this? So can it also, if it's helping them, also help us in terms of being able to combat it?
Yes and no. The way I see AI, it's like a child, right? You teach it, hey, the pot is hot, right? And the child's got to touch the hot pot a couple times before they realize, okay, stop touching the hot pot, right? And once you teach it certain lessons, it then goes off and starts doing things on its own. And people who use any kind of tool realize they start asking it questions, and then all of a sudden they start getting some weird results back. Like it's not quite where it wants to be. Like with us, we use AI in a variety of fashions, but we don't let it make certain decisions for us. Like we still have human verified decisions that are being made about how our system works. We like machine learning, which is a little bit less. It's a little less self-learning than say an AI model would be. Um, but AI can be useful in helping to identify fraud and help pinpoint fraud. But in mitigating it, it becomes very difficult to do it effectively from what we've seen so far. Now that I expect that to change over time as these things get smarter. But it's like anything else, human experience is going to be very important in being able to solve fraud.
Yeah, but the good news is, even if we don't have the in-house tools in place, there are solutions like Anura that is going to really could come in at it seems like a very cost effectively help you address this really big problem.
Yeah, and and I look at it this way: when I want to say it was probably 2004, I had a marketing company, a digital marketing company. Think Google, but a lot smaller, obviously. Everything compared to Google is a lot smaller, right? But it was basically a text-based ad platform where people can come and they can bid on text-based ads inside of you know all kinds of blog sites that we were connected with, and it was a nice simple thing. And early on, we launched it in 2003. About 2004, we started getting some complaints from clients that, hey, we're noticing that the ROI is starting to drop on what we're buying from you. It wasn't like that before, but it is now. What's going on? So I did some research, found out, hey, this it looks like fraud to me. So I remember telling my partner, I don't want to be the person solving fraud. So let me just go find a fraud solution myself, bolt it on, and call it a day. But in 2004, there were no publicly available fraud solutions. They were just weren't available. In fact, the first, I guess, commercially available one didn't come out until like 2008, 2009. So back in 2004, I'm a developer. I've been writing code since I'm like age 8 and 9 years old. I said, I'll just write it myself. So I wrote something and then I kept evolving it over the years. And after about 10 years, we had people, hey, I love your platform. Would love to use that fraud technology outside of your platform. And that's where Anura came from. It basically got spun off into its own company, and just
Hmm.
people wanted the product themselves because they found it more cost effective to license our technology than try to build it themselves.
Well, you've had this incredible track record. You've established five multi-million dollar companies in the last 30 years. And so you've got a unique perspective on this. What do you think separates exceptional leadership from just good enough?
I think that exists within our core values. One of our core values is never satisfied, right? You build something, and after you build it and you put all this stuff into it, you look back and say, no, it could be better. And I think exceptional leaders never satisfied with the status quo, never satisfied, like happy with what they have, right? What they built and accomplished at that point, but no, it can be better. And I think that makes a difference with an exceptional leader versus just an okay leader is pushing your team to build a better and better product. And it just takes time.
Yeah. And did culture play a big role for you in that in terms of really defining and having an aspiration for the kind of culture you wanted and then being able to hire in alignment to that? Was that a big part of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I never considered myself, a leader for many years. I was just one of the guys, working on, I had my job and I was doing my job and working with the team. And it was funny. It was I don't know, maybe 10 years ago is where it were kind of 10, 15, I don't know. Time is kind of blurring together at this point. I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, something like that. I'm sitting in the office working on a project, and all of a sudden one of my employees walks in and says, "Oh, I wanted to introduce you to my parents. Introduce the parents. Hey, this is my boss." And all of a sudden, I'm like, "When did that happen?" I'm just one of the guys in the trenches working on a project. It just kind of transitioned over time that all of a sudden I'm running a company and responsible for people's livelihoods, and all of a sudden it changes the feeling of how things are set up. But culture, yeah, like going back to the culture question, we built a culture of just everybody owning a project, working on the project, working together as a team. Again, one of our other core values is being united as united, and it's being working together as a team. And I guess that explains why in our company we have a lot of tenure. I mean, I've got a lot of people over 10 years with us for a small company. That's impressive.
Yeah, of course, the collaboration is huge. Are there some things you intentionally do, Rich, to really reinforce that behavior of thinking team versus being maybe a little more selfish or silos across teams?
I think the one, and this is just kind of a personal thing. Um, I don't think of people as employees. I think of them as teammates. And I think when you think of it that way, it kind of changes how you look at things, right? I guess it's kind of being, instead of being the coach, you're one of the guys, you're one of the team, you're part of that team, and everybody's a teammate. Because it doesn't matter what job you hold in the company. If it was important enough to hire for, it's important enough to be part of the team, part of that team. Granted, certain responsibilities, hey, your sales leader might be more, might have different responsibilities than the salesperson, but we're all on the same team together. We all have projects, we all have jobs to it, and we all have goals to hit. And I think that's important to just, from a mental standpoint, think everybody's a teammate versus an employee.
And I would think, in a senior leadership role or as the CEO, the idea that you're actually accessible and, literally maybe sometimes in the trenches to really have the backs of your employees, that have just having that visibility, accessibility, that's got to mean a lot too.
I think it does. Like, I talk to other leaders and how they operate, and I find myself more of a hands-on, just because it's how I've always been. Always owning a project, always working on stuff, and I just see that, I guess when you come into the office every day, and people walk in, they see you there every day, they just know that you care about the company, you care about the people, you care about the customers. It's not just a hands-off CEO. I see a lot of hands-off CEOs, and there's a lot of them, and I guess at certain level of business, you have to get to that point. Like, you're not going to be able to run multiple companies if you're constantly working on projects within companies. And that just wasn't my goal. My goal was to build a great product that our customers love and appreciate, and being part of the team that puts that together. So I guess that's, that's where it goes with that.
What's the best piece of business advice you have ever received?
So, when you're hiring people to do a job, you know, again, being a control freak like I am, you think you're going to be the best person to get that job done at the best possible way. But you can't do everything, right? You need a team to grow a company. And the piece of advice I was told, I walked to somebody and I said, wow, your company's growing. At this point, I want to say they had 50 to 100 employees, and they were at that stage of growth. And they were just adding people like on a weekly basis. And I'm like, how do you do it? Like, how do you let go of key projects that you are running and trust it with somebody new to your company that, they're taking on a role like, and I use an example, like you have a new person head of technology, and they're taking on the role that you were running, and you were very efficient with your code and very efficient with hardware, so you keep your costs down. Like, how do you get to that stage where you trust somebody? And the piece of advice was, if they can do 80% of what I could do, it's worth it. He says, you, in your mind, you're never going to find somebody to do 100%. And he goes, but what's funny is, you start doing that, you're hoping for that 80%, you're going to find those really good leaders that, exceed 100% or exceed what you were able to do, because this is all they're focusing on. You're spreading yourself thin. You're working on marketing. You're working on technology. You're working on client acquisition. You're working on all these different spaces. So you spread yourself too thin, you become inefficient at a lot of things. But in your mind, as you're starting that business, you still, think you do a better job than anybody else, but you don't give yourself the time to do it. So when you hire somebody who does 80% of what you think you can do, that's a win. However, 9 times out of 10, when you find somebody that does that, once they get they get a handle on the position, they end up exceeding what you were able to accomplish. And that's what you really got. You just got to trust that you're finding those people that can do at least 80% of what you were doing, to let go, so you can focus on something else within the business. And I think that was a great piece of advice, because that allowed me to start letting go of things and trusting other people to take over and grow those divisions, and not have to be 100% hands-on on that. Just pick a project that I'm going to work on, I'm going to control, but all the other projects that I was working on, get somebody else to take over so that I can grow the company.
Yeah, you really nailed something there. You talked about trust, and the trust to be able to let go and not get in the way of your company's growth by trying to hold on too tight to the reins of everything. And I think history is littered with so many companies that don't make it because the founder never really got to the point where they could let go.
Yeah, And that's every founder's problem is letting go. Um, at least that's how I see it. Like you look at the founder-led companies that they'll build a product, they'll grow they'll get things started. When they first started, they are, most of them, like myself, control freaks, you know. And the hardest part is letting go and trusting somebody else to do it. But it's the only way to really grow a company and to get customer satisfaction to the highest possible level. You just can't do everything yourself. And I look at it all the time. I've got a great support team. Our support team. I mean, if you look at our Google reviews, 70% of our Google reviews are all about our support team. How people love the fact that we get back to them very quickly. For us, it's a 1 business hour response time. We want to make sure people, if they have questions, they get answers right away. And building that team, like originally, that was one of the jobs of course, you're doing all the jobs, but in the beginning, I was doing that job, making sure, and customers knew that. Hey, it's the CEO back to me, and he gets back to me pretty quick. But as we grow the company, I can't do that anymore. I have way too many other responsibilities that I'm working on, that getting back to people just, it was getting delayed and delayed. So once we started building a support team, having CSMs and sales engineers to be able to bridge that gap and build that camaraderie, it's gotten to a point now where I am glad I have that team in place, because I literally wouldn't have the time to help my customers. And again, the most important aspect of our business is our customers. They pay for everything. They tell us what they need as far as the product, and they help us develop that product and make the product grow.
So when you're now thinking about the future, what makes you optimistic?
It's the fact that I let go. And I'm optimistic about finding that next team member that's going to help us get to the next level with the company, finding the next group that we're going to bring in, the next group of people. That's what I look forward to, is finding, because the biggest headache, I think, as a business owner, and this is a catch-22, is employees, right? Trying to find, and it's not the employee, it's trying to find the employee for a given position. Like, everybody that we interview is good for a position somewhere. They're just trying to put them in the right seat in the right company. So as I'm going through resumes and stuff and looking for that next person, it's trying to find the right person for the seat that we're trying to fill. And that's what I get excited about, is once you meet that next team member who's going to be dedicated to taking care of the company and taking care of the clients, that gets me excited.
Yeah. And of course, we're in just such a crazy time. It feels like, in terms of just the job market, a lot of the bigger companies in technology, they've announced that there's some restructuring. And so it seems like there's never been a time where there's more really highly qualified candidates that are out there seeking their next awesome role. So that's an opportunity, but then also the competition for that top talent has to be pretty high too, I would think.
Yeah, we come across that a lot. And it basically, we sell our culture, we show people what we're trying to accomplish, and if they're buying into our vision, I mean, they'll make a good team member. Um, we've been very big in office company. In fact, I want to say 80% of our staff is in office here in Delaware, and I like it. I like to like give you example. Today is we're snowed out because of the storm that came in. Um, so it's a work from home thing, and I miss being in the office. I miss being able to walk over to someone's desk and have a conversation. Now I got to get them on Slack or Zoom or something like that to have a conversation. It's so much easier just to walk over their desk and say, "Hey, what's going on? How about let's talk about this next piece of that we have to solve." Um, anyway, that's just I guess I'm old school. At my age and how I grew up, I always grew up in an office environment. I always enjoyed the office environment, and so we're, like I said, 80, I guess, but there's certain positions that we just have a hard time filling with our location. So because a lot of people are, especially now, you have everybody all over the place and transient. Some people just, if you want that person, you just got to do a remote
Yeah.
position.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Rich, do you have any other final advice for leaders to help bring that fraud risk down and also elevate the performance of their teams?
Well, in bringing that fraud down at this point, you really need a third party solution. I think. I think it's gotten so advanced, it's gotten so bad with fraud, that you really need that expertise that comes from a third party. And growing the team, like I said, the biggest mindset is understanding their teammates, not employees. I think having that mindset makes a big difference in how you treat people, and I think that's proven in our businesses. We've had a lot of people follow us from one business to employees follow us from one business to another, and have long tenure with us. I mean, I think that goes a long way. I've got a handful of employees that say they never want to work for another company. They love the atmosphere that we built, and they love working for us, and that's great. We love that kind of stuff, especially when they're performing at such high levels. It's great to have that buy-in from the teammates.
Well, Rich, thanks for joining and really helping us get our arms around this whole digital marketing, advertising fraud. But how can we navigate forward and still drive company growth with that? And of course, leadership lessons from your successful track record, really motivating. And thanks again for joining.
Thanks for having me.